In this video, we're back to working on the green can of worms, and we find some more problems. We also fix a bunch of problems with extremely irritating clamps. And do we get it fixed, folks? Well, you have to wait to the end to find out. So we've got all our parts here, and as you can see, there's quite a few of them. And if you watch previous video, pretty much all of these parts were rusted or corroded to the point that they weren't sealing anymore. And unfortunately, they had to be replaced, and that's because they had a whole bunch of leaks causing very low boost pressure, which was causing this engine not to regen. And this was the rustiest, most corroded cat engine I think I've ever worked on. Now, before we went putting it back together, luckily it didn't need a new turbocharger. I like to use this, which is called a needle scaler, to get all the big rust chunks off. This is what I use also on engine blocks when I'm cleaning them to paint them during a rebuild. It works great for breaking apart little loose pieces of basically rust and things that are going to fall off and you don't want getting in the engine. So, got that. You can see I put that part back on, and then I put our first elbow and bellows back on, and now we're going to be putting on, hopefully without too many problems, although I know this is going to be tough because I've done these before, is all of these bellows and clamps and ducting, air tubes, the pre-cooler, and they have so many lines and hoses in this one section of the engine. It's insane, and they're so close together. Most of the clamps will actually hit something, and they're these T-bolt style clamps. And if you get them in the wrong position, you won't be able to tighten them, or you'll block something that you're trying to tighten otherwise. So what I'm doing here is I'm sped it up, obviously, but what I'm just trying to do is align it, and basically what we have to do is get them all in position together, all of the tubes and ducting, and then what you have to do then is tighten them all after they're together, because if you, like I said, if you put the clamps on and tighten them, now this section of the video is sped up, I believe 300%, so you can tell pretty frustrating trying to get this clamp on. I've done this before, folks, I swear. But they're a real pain in the butt. And even if you go by sys and look at how the old ones used to be, it seems like they just never line up, again, the correct way. So like I said, what you're going to do is just get them on, try to get it in place, and then you're going to tighten them all after. Finally got this one on, and this is one of the harder ones, but you can see here we've got that on. We've also got our pre-cooler on, which if you're familiar with the Assert pre-coolers on the previous model engines, they were much larger than the pre-cooler here. Obviously, those larger ones wouldn't fit because they added so much more stuff on the regen engines here. Now, these are coolant hoses, and what I'm doing is pretty much doing any cooling or air system. I like to spray just a little bit of soapy water on the nipples. And what that does is it just helps for getting the hoses on. If you put them on dry, it can be very difficult. Also, you usually have to slide it on and then reposition it. So I found anything with, like I said, either coolant or air systems, I'll usually spray that. If it's the really big air ducting for the intake or something, sometimes I'll use like rubber lubricant or the same stuff that I use for the liner installation. That tends to have a lot more lubricating properties, and those bigger tubes are much more tricky. So I've got those on, just tighten them now, and using this Milwaukee little driver. I pretty much use this for clamps all the time. Sometimes I'll hand tighten them, but tell you the truth, you get kind of familiar with your tools to the point that you know how tight clamps are supposed to be, and you can usually use these drivers. Most clamps do not get hand tightened. I just use this. Same with kind of the T-bolt style clamps. I'll use my 1/4-inch driver. It seems to put out about 10 foot-pounds, which is pretty much what all those torque to, if you were to torque them. Now, if you're not familiar, Cat likes to use these ridged clamps. I don't know if you guys have seen these before. They're kind of a two-piece style. They have like an inner sleeve that's ridged. Do you guys like those? Have you used them? Do you take the inner piece out? I used to hate them, and I would take the ridge part out, but anymore I actually leave them in. So they seem to do okay. You just got to be a little more careful when installing them. So you can see we've got our pre-core in there, the hoses are in, and now I'm just getting this, which is the largest piece. This was the one they had that was corroded out and someone had siliconed. Wonderful. Back together. So this is the main outlet from the pre-cooler. to the charge air cooler. Now, if you're not familiar with cats, you might be wondering, well, why is there a cooler going to a cooler? Well, the compound turbos, meaning the 2-turbo system there, creates a lot of heat. And if you just use a charge air cooler, it wouldn't cool down the intake charge enough. So that's why they have the pre-cooler, which is a coolant to air heat exchanger. So we are getting close to the end here as far as putting all these parts back together. And we got this fun little tube, which is what connects the boosted air system. And that is a snapped off rusted bolt. Not the first and the last on this engine. You can see C's there. Thought I was going to break this bolt, but luckily it actually broke free. Now the other one was actually corroded into the tube and rusted in so bad it took about 20 minutes of me with the tube off, heating it and cooling it, trying to get penetrating oil in, and then I was able to hammer it out. It was basically a chemistry welded in stud. So this is what it looks like here. This is where that tube goes that we're trying to get off. That's the problem on these really rusted ones. Even the little stuff can take so long to do. Now this tube here, we've got some exhaust leaks, and look at this rear clamp. Look at that thing. Do you see that? The T part, the studded part, is up against next another spacer. What? Who does that? But anyway, about 20 minutes later, we got that replaced, and we are back together, folks. So luckily, we've got all of the destroyed items removed and replaced with new items. This week's Destruction of the Week comes from Jerry. Thank you, Jerry, as always. And he's got it coming here with a cracked liner. Yeah, it came in for what the customer thought was possibly a bad head gasket or head. And no, cracked liner. You can see it much better there. Cracked all the way through the flange. Not something you see very often, but one you can definitely tell is broken is this one from Nathan. And this is a 3516, well, what used to be piston. And I believe that's the rod cap there. If you're not familiar, these are huge 3,000 horsepower engines, folks. So these parts are big and expensive. Engine block here, you can see the, I don't know why it's so rusted. They must have had it uncovered for a long time, but you can see the block's been destroyed. There's part of a connecting rod. I believe what you're looking there is the crank journal. That's really good. And yeah, this one, really bad shape, folks. I would not want to have to pay for repairing one of these big engines. They are super expensive. And a lot of work, that's for sure. And it's a 16-cylinder engine. So let's get back to our job at hand. Hey guys, Josh from the Update channel, and we're back in the green can of worms. I got all the tubes back on, and we're ready to try our regen attempt. You might hear the dinging, and still has the high soot load code, because obviously it can't regen. Boost pressure is now slightly more than DPF differential pressure. Now you might be saying, well, shouldn't it be way higher? Well, as differential pressure increases, your boost is going to decrease due to the inefficiencies of the exhaust stream on the turbochargers. So hopefully we're not at the tipping point where the DPF is actually too plugged to allow enough boost for the secondary air, but I hope we have enough. Let's try to regen it and see what happens. Alright, so here's what we're looking at. You can see our boost pressure is 1.5 and our differential pressure is 1.2. Now before that was like 0.9 and 1.2, so not a huge increase, but you have to have more boost pressure than you have differential pressure. Now the problem is the differential pressure is still fairly high. Generally you don't want it over 1, but that wouldn't have fixed all the leaks. So we're going to try and do a regen, and hopefully it works. Above 1 during the regen, just running here is not real good. It might be getting to the tipping point where there's just too much exhaust restriction to get much boost built in the system. Hopefully that's not the case and we can get it to ignite. So it's down here, it says we're preparing for after treatment. That is what they call pending checks. Then it's going to go to art ignition, and we're going to be watching this this line right here and waiting for that to spike up. Hopefully it does. So it's starting art ignition. Engine tone changes for higher fuel pressure. Remember, it would not ignite before. Oh, hey! We have ignition! So it wasn't doing that before. now we just need to see if it'll regen. So it did start to regen, and it regen for about 10 minutes, and then it kicked out for low secondary airflow, even though it was regenning. So I've got a trick to kind of help these along if the differential pressure is too high, but it involves putting an air nozzle into the intake. Well, when you're working on this rusted, corroded engine, plugs don't come out. In fact, this one just broke the intake manifold trying to take it out. So anyway, a couple days later, we are running here, and that's our boost, 1.2 psi. And this new intake manifold, notice that, is an airline from the shop. And we're going to give her some extra boost. And you might be wondering, what the heck, why are you doing this? Well, folks, this engine will regen, but it's kicking out for low secondary air. And if you can increase the boost pressure, you'll get more secondary air. Look at that, we got half another psi, just a little extra air. And if you can do that, it'll regen to the point where your differential pressure will come down, and then your boost will naturally increase, which is what's happening here. You see we're at 27% complete. Our regen temps look pretty good. It did take a couple attempts because it kept kicking it out, even with the added air. And then what you do is after it's good and clean, you can disconnect the airline, because obviously you can't run around with an airline hanging out of your hood. And look at that, temps look good, right? Ready to go. It actually completed a successful regen. And then on the next one, it failed again. So at this point, folks, I don't actually 100% know what we're going to do. We got low secondary air. Maybe I missed a clamp or something, but we're going to have to do some more troubleshooting on it, and this is all I have to say about this engine. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and for always, thanks for watching.